Welcome to the history and evolution of the MMORPG genre. Part 4, The Present and Future, Section 2, Bless Unleashed. Now, this last video is going to be a bit different from the other videos in this series, mostly because the information available is rather sparse for this last game that we will look at, and it's mostly because the game is brand new. Bless Unleashed was released by Round 8 Studios on Xbox One on March 12, 2020, and PlayStation 4 on October 22, 2020. This is a rare opportunity for us to see an MMORPG in its infancy. I will say that the game is beautiful to look at, however, it isn't doing well with the reviewers. First, let's look at how it performs in the KEDBQ system, one last time. Just as a reminder, this system is one that I came up with to help us understand MMORPGs by analyzing specific parts of them to better understand how they stack up to their predecessors. And first we'll start off with the characters section. There are 5 races and 5 classes in Bless Unleashed. However, not every race can play every class. The game actually has the player pick out their class and then the race available for that class. This is probably due to the amount of detail they are going for on the armor for these classes. What is unique about the customization is the amount of freedom the player is allowed to have for customizing their avatars, specifically in the body portions and the colors. It's literally ridiculous. I saw other players that were well over 3 feet taller than my character, and my character was taller than most just based on what her race was. As for the effect the player has on the world, it's pretty standard as far as MMORPGs go. You are the only person that can stand up against a great evil, and along the way, a lot of people are going to ask you to take out their trash and kill their pests. When it comes to the economy section, Bless Unleashed, like many other MMOs that we have looked at, uses a market board as the basis of the player economy, in a way. There are NPCs in large towns that run the marketplace that players use to sell to each other. On screen right now, you can see a small NPC surrounded by players that are all trying to use the market board. However, crafting works like it does in Elder Scrolls Online, where any crafting station can be used by any player, and the crafting skills are leveled up at these stations as well by just crafting things. Now, the dungeons section. Dungeons in Blessed Unleashed are more of boss fights. There is only one enemy against the player, and however many players are required for the dungeon. Questing in the overworld is also fairly basic, with no real special types of questing like WoW and the Secret World had. Actually, the only dungeon that I've gone into was against this one enemy that you see on screen right now, and it was only me and one other player in there. So it was a 2-on-1 fight, and it really didn't matter if it was a tank or a damage dealer or a healer. That kind of ties into the bosses section. And like I said, dungeons are just boss fights, but there are also field bosses that roam around an area of the map that usually takes multiple players to easily take out, like the one you see on screen right now. With the combat system, the players have to learn how the enemy attacks look as the visual cues for a lot of attacks, as they don't have a big red danger zone marker on the ground. Moving on to the competition section, PvP is locked behind a level wall, meaning that players must get to level 30 before they can unlock it. There are battlegrounds where multiple players can engage in team battles, but for the most part, PvP takes place in the open world. Basically, at 30, players get the opportunity to quote-unquote enable PvP, and then attack any player outside of a protected area, like towns and cities. On to endgame. Bless will be getting raids, but outside of that, the end game is basically just grinding for better gear and levels and crafting or different blessings that change up the player's fighting style. This is one of the main drawbacks of the game so far. Lastly, the world section. Technically, the world is split into a bunch of areas, but the loading between these areas is so quick that it pretty much feels like a persistent world. The only other instance are specific story moments, or dungeons. Alright, one last time. Welcome to the section of the video where I talk about the user interface and the game's overall play feel. And I think I'll start with that this time, the play feel, because this game, Bless Unleashed, has such a unique feel in that it's just kind of slow. Maybe deliberate's a better word. As you can see, my character's walking speed is a lot slower than other games that we've played. I do have a sprint, but it only lasts for a few seconds before I get tired. And there are mounts that do help you go faster, but they're controlled a lot like how I believe horses were in The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. You get them to start going, and then you can kind of direct them, and they have their own sprint. But for the most part, walking around is extremely slow, and the combat's slow. No, I do think deliberate's the better term for it. In that you work off of your R1 and R2 buttons on your controller, and sometimes the circle button is thrown in there. Let's try and get one of these guys. There we go. It's a combo system, kind of like what Devil May Cry series and the God of War series had, except far more deliberate. You can't just hammer in the combos and know that the character is going to keep doing whatever combos you've already stuck in. It has to be at a very slow pace. But it is interesting. You can also press your L1 button to bring up a bunch of, I guess they would be kind of like off-global cooldowns. And these abilities are far more crunchier and, dare I say it, visually appealing to look at. Like this. And the bigger the attack, the more damage it does too. But anyways, let me get out of combat. I'll talk more about why I think the combat is like this later on in the video. Let's get over to the UI. Up there in the top right-hand corner, you see a mini-map. Kind of like what we've talked about before, but because this game is completely on the controller, I can't float a cursor over it to see what each symbol means. I kind of just have to know. That being said, if I pull up the big map, I can go over those areas. So while I might not be able to do it on the move, I can stop and look at my map. Speaking of the map, I do kind of like how it looks like it's almost a watercolor painting. And with how the world is set up, it looks a lot like I'll be uncovering stuff as I move outwards, and I will be almost making the map as I explore. But all of the areas and quests that I can go on are big and bold on the map, so it's very hard to get lost in this game. As for the items, the bag works a lot like how the bag did in World of Warcraft, where you start off with a certain number of slots and then you build it up. However, the difference is that in World of Warcraft, when you would get 5 slots at a time, in Bless Unleashed, you start off with 10 and then you have to find or receive items. There's a small item called a piece of a bag that you turn into a vendor in the towns, and you have to collect 4 of them before you can get one more inventory slot. You can also get rewards for some quest bag upgrade, items, and those can be multiple slots. But for the most part, your bag is always constantly growing. It's strange, and it has led to me having over full inventories a few times. There are 3 different classes. There are the damage class, the tanky class, and the healer class in this one. But with how the combat is set up and how hard all of the characters hit, the healer class is really more of a support class, giving buffs to people around it while still doing some healing. It's much more combat focused, and mostly because they don't have any like big scale raids or dungeons in this game. It's mostly just fighting large enemies like that guy off in the distance over there. Health and using health items is a little bit more on the individual player than one player handling all of it. When you talk to NPCs, it kind of brings up this little bar underneath. You don't really have many options of what to choose from, and the quests are usually pretty straightforward, so you don't have a lot to read. Overall, I think the game has a lot of potential, but there are definitely areas that can be improved upon. Mostly the story and the more filling out the items and skills usage, and maybe adjusting the speed of the game slightly, just so it doesn't feel like everything's rather sluggish. Because I do like how everything looks. These moves look amazing, and when you hit things with them, it feels very rewarding and chunky and devastating, especially for this class. But anyways, we'll move on to my final thoughts about the game. The main issue that I have been seeing that game reviewers have had with the game is a large amounts of grinding, which is definitely not the norm nowadays in MMOs. And the slow combat that works off of the blessing system seems to also be an issue. As far as the grinding goes, that is a preference thing, and to be honest, I do agree that the grinding can get annoying. But as for the combat, I actually like it. I do understand that the combo system can get a bit monotonous, and pressing the buttons over and over again can get annoying, but I like how the bless system limits the player to at most 4 abilities, and with there being so many different ones. I would like to quickly point out that in Final Fantasy XIV, which I think is the best MMO I've ever played, the jobs usually work with having a set rotation, which has the same abilities being pressed over and over again, while working in other more powerful ones when you can, which is a lot like how this is. It's just set up like a different game rather than it being on a hotbar. And while the combos do feel slow, I do see the opportunity for a lot of growth here in future expansions. As the game goes on, the combat could start feeling more involved with more moves and tweaks to the stamina system. This is an exciting time for an MMORPG. How does the game respond to the initial critiques? As I covered in my Final Fantasy XIV review, a game can be terrible at launch, but if the developer cares about the game and its players, it can turn it around. Personally, I have had a lot of fun with Bless Unleashed so far, and I hope that it does improve and that it continues to live on. If it leaves an impact on the genre, I believe it'll come from the character customization options. Seriously, the options that the players can have lead to truly unique characters. And if there was another, it would be the combat system. It's kind of like Devil May Cry, except it tells the players the combos, and it's at half speed of what Devil May Cry would actually be. The fate of this game really depends on how the developers respond and how it continues to develop from here on out. My last thoughts is that Bless Unleashed is a really pretty MMORPG that is made for the casual player. It has a straightforward combat system, and a grindy game may be boring, but it's easy for anyone to play. Also, the game is free, and the things that players can spend money on unlock more character slots or more gear enhancement options, and more quality of life improvements. Basically, it's all just a bunch of microtransactions. And I hope to see this game make it to an expansion and see how it develops. This has been a journey. I think I just want a few moments to reflect on what I've learned. Playing an MMORPG is a different experience than any other type of game. I think one of the reasons is that the games have to do what most single-player games do, but they have to do it for a ton of people. What I mean is that in most single-player RPGs, the player is the hero of the world. Every decision affects the world because the player is the most powerful person in that world. In an MMORPG, the player expects that same experience, except that every single player playing the game expects that same experience, and all at the same time. I think it's able to achieve this by setting up instances for players to meet out in the world while playing. This leads to at least some amount of cooperation, which will make for a far more memorable experience. That is, to work with another real human being, rather than just working with a pre-programmed computer. MMORPGs are also one of the few types of games that are truly alive. Other multiplayer games have players wait in a lobby until the game begins, but as long as MMO servers are active, then that game is going on whether the player is on or not. Someone is in there having an adventure. It's beautiful to watch the game grow and develop. In most games' lives, they can only be played and replayed, and then waiting for the next edition to come out. But as we've seen in a lot of these games, they are still active and receiving updates. They're still growing and improving. And while there will always be a new Call of Duty that will be shinier with more guns and new maps, my character that I have spent literal years of my life playing as will be able to continue having adventures in the same world year after year. That's the most important thing I think that MMORPGs do for its player. They show us adventures and journeys that we can't experience in our real life, and we can have those adventures with the friends that we make in this wonderful little world we live in together. So, for the last time in this series, let's see where the last two games rank for me personally. Looking at it, EverQuest 1 is still bringing up the rear. To be honest, it was the most annoyed I have been playing an MMO so far. And the only reason that Meridian 59 is at number 8 isn't because it's a bad game. It's just because it doesn't have a lot to do in it compared to the others on this list. I would still highly recommend playing it. The Secret World Legends is next, and mostly that's just because it was the one that I had the most issues playing. The Lord of the Rings Online, the only downside I really have with it is how you have to still pay real money for every single expansion. And then we have Bless Unleashed. It's not receiving great reviews so far, but I see a lot of potential in it, and I think if they can turn the game around, it will be remembered for being truly great and unique. So I'm going to put it in the middle of the pack just because I think it has a future. Then we have EverQuest 2. A huge MMO in and of itself with so much to do it might seem overwhelming, but if you can get into it, it's a very rewarding experience. And then we get to our top 3, and in third place is Elder Scrolls Online. And to be completely honest, there isn't much room between these 3 games. They all offer highly similar experiences, but also extremely different ones. Elder Scrolls Online is like playing Skyrim, except you can play with all of your friends like you always wanted to. And then World of Warcraft in second is the OG, not necessarily the first made, but the first to really nail the system of the game. The quintessential MMO, if you will. And then at number 1 is my favorite game, and the one that I will sing the praises of till I am blue in the face, Final Fantasy XIV. I'm happy with this list. And I'm also happy with this project. Thank you for watching all of these videos. I had so much fun putting them together. And if you've stuck through every single one of these videos, I would like to say a special thank you to you. I'll hopefully be able to put out more content like this in the future. But for right now, please like and subscribe. And one last time, thank you. Goodbye.